It's not every day you walk into your own barn and find 50 strangers sipping Prosecco under a chandelier made of mason jars and fairy lights. But that's exactly what happened to me on a random Saturday morning when I opened the double doors and was nearly knocked over by a wave of shrieking laughter, overpowering perfume, and Taylor Swift blaring through a Bluetooth speaker. I stood there, frozen, while a woman in a white lace romper yelled, "It's the bride-to-be!" and everyone screamed like they were at a boy band reunion tour. Except none of them noticed I wasn't part of the bridal party. I was the owner of the barn, and I had absolutely no idea how any of them got inside. Now let me back up a second. I live on a small property just outside of the HOA's jurisdiction, barely. My grandfather built the barn decades ago, and it stood the test of time even as the subdivision crept closer year after year. The HOA hates it. They say it's an eyesore that doesn't match community standards. I say it's my property and they can kindly go mulch themselves. I use it for storage, sometimes a little woodworking, and lately it's been closed because of pest issues. I literally had a warning sign on the door that read, "Do not enter, active wasp treatment." I thought that was clear enough. Apparently, to Angela and Linda, it read, "Welcome to the perfect venue." Angela is the bride. Linda is the older sister and self-proclaimed event goddess. Together, they're like a two-headed hydra made of rhinestones, entitlement and passive aggression. I've encountered them before at HOA meetings. They both think they're the next Martha Stewart meets Beyoncé, but with none of the class and all of the delusion. Last time I saw them, they were arguing over whether garden gnomes should be banned because they attract raccoons. I wish I were making that up. So how did they end up throwing a full-scale bridal shower in my barn? According to Linda, who had the audacity to saunter up to me mid-mimosa with a fake smile, they needed a rustic venue that screamed charm with a twist, and honestly your barn was just sitting there doing nothing. She waved a glittery clipboard like it was a badge of honor. "We didn't think you'd mind. It's not like you use it." I should have flipped, screamed, called the cops, but I didn't. I just stood there with my arms crossed while a woman in a floppy sun hat asked me if I could bring more ice from the house. I calmly said, "Sure." Right after I call animal control about the literal wasps above your head. That shut a few people up. Angela came over, flapping her arms like a chicken in distress, and tried to guilt me into letting them continue. "This is the most important day of my life. You wouldn't understand, you're not even married," she snapped, as if my relationship status had anything to do with her trespassing. That's when Linda dropped the bomb. The HOA said it was fine. "We have permission." That caught me off guard. I called her bluff. No one in the HOA had the authority to greenlight an event on private land. But sure enough, 5 minutes later, here comes Roger, the HOA president, walking up the gravel path with a clipboard and a smug little wave. "We thought it would be a nice community gesture," he said. "Something to uplift neighborhood morale." I looked him dead in the eye and asked, "By illegally breaking and entering my property?" He laughed nervously and told me not to be dramatic. I wanted to take a flamethrower to the entire situation. But instead, I calmly turned around, walked back into my house, and started plotting. I wasn't just going to shut down the bridal shower. I was going to make sure they never forgot the mistake of underestimating me. They thought they were clever for hijacking my barn for their Pinterest nightmare of a party. They had no idea who they were messing with. The first thing I did was check the barn surveillance cameras. Yep, footage of Linda using a bobby pin to pop the lock like she was in some kind of low-rent heist movie. I downloaded everything. Then I texted my pest control guy, Marvin, and asked him about the status of the wasp treatment. He texted back a single word that made my day: dormant. As in, the wasps were still there, just not active. Yet, I smiled for the first time all morning. Later that night, as the sun went down and the last squeals of Team Bride faded into the night, I stood by the barn door watching them pack up. Angela tried to hug me. I stepped back. "You're lucky they didn't swarm today," I said quietly. "But I can't promise next time." Linda laughed like I was joking. But I wasn't. I locked the barn behind them and sealed every gap tight. Then I made a call to Marvin for a very specific kind of follow-up treatment. They'd be back. And when they were, the Real party would begin. I spent the next few days playing the calm, cooperative neighbor, while quietly setting the stage for what would be the most memorable sequel to a bridal shower since someone spiked Grandma's tea with vodka at my cousin's wedding. The Karen sisters had no idea I was working with a pest control guy whose nickname on my phone was literally Buzzkill Marvin. He was more excited about this plan than I was, and that's saying something. We weren't doing anything illegal, let's be clear. In fact, I was taking extra care to do everything by the book. Because if you're going to pull off revenge that hits like a sledgehammer wrapped in legality, the details have to be flawless. Marvin and I met in the early morning, well before the sun was up and nosy HOA eyes were peeking out behind their lace curtains. He brought his gear, a flashlight, and a thermos that smelled like burnt rubber and ambition. "Still dormant," he said as we stood beneath the exposed rafters of the barn. "But if someone makes enough noise or kicks a chair leg too hard, that whole colony's gonna think it's go time." I asked how dangerous the swarm could be. Marvin shrugged. "No one's gonna die unless they're dumb enough to stand still and scream. But I'd suggest not inviting your worst enemies in here unless you really don't like them." Perfect. While Marvin secured the upper beams to make sure the wasps had a safe place to get angry, I reached out to animal control. Not because I had to, but because I wanted documented proof that I was aware of the situation and had already taken the appropriate steps to protect both the pests and the public. I told them I suspected there were dormant wasps in my private barn and that I was concerned about trespassers re-entering without my permission. They thanked me for being proactive and logged my call. Paper trail check. Meanwhile, word started circulating in the neighborhood. Not about the wasps. No, I was tight-lipped about that, but about how generous I'd been to lend my barn for the bridal shower. I didn't correct anyone. In fact, I leaned into the myth. "Just glad they had a good time," I said with a smile that was 90% teeth and 10% vengeance. I knew what was coming. I needed them to think everything was cool. The trap only works if the mouse doesn't know it's cheese-flavored TNT. A couple days later, Linda texted me from a number I didn't recognize. "Hey, just wondering if the barn is open again next weekend? We're thinking of hosting a follow-up brunch/gift unwrapping party thing. Should be super chill. Promise we'll clean up this time." I stared at that message like it was a toddler asking to juggle knives. I responded exactly once. "Sure. Just don't enter before Saturday morning. I need time to air it out." She sent a thumbs-up emoji and a heart. I nearly laughed myself into a hernia. The next phase of the plan was noise prep. I knew the wasps weren't going to stay calm if the bridal chaos returned full volume, and Linda was the kind of person who thought whispering meant yelling with your mouth slightly closed. Marvin warned me again. "If you're nearby when it kicks off, be ready to run. Once they swarm, it's like dropping Mentos into a Coke bottle and shaking it with a taser." I thanked him, double-checked the barn's locking mechanism, and installed a temporary latch on the outside. Again, nothing dangerous, just something to slow down the inevitable stampede. Safety first, revenge second. By Friday afternoon, I noticed cars driving slowly past my property. The same kind of sedans and SUVs you only ever see when there's free wine involved. Angela's entourage was back in town. Linda posted a boomerang of her clinking glasses with some of the same women who had worn floor-length dresses and cowboy boots last time. The caption said, "Round 2, Barn Babe Brunch Bash." I almost choked on my coffee. Even the wasps were probably rolling their compound eyes. Saturday morning came, bright and warm. I woke early, checked the barn, and made one final round to make sure everything was secure. The wasps were still there, still quiet. Marvin had left a note taped to the wall. "Buzz you later." I left the barn doors open this time. I wanted them to waltz right in, no friction. Let them feel entitled. Let them believe they'd claimed their rustic paradise again. By 10, they began arriving, laughing, carrying pastel gift bags, balancing lattes and avocado toast like they were auditioning for some reality show called Bridal Invasion, HOA edition. I stood by my kitchen window with binoculars and a mug of tea, watching as Angela twirled dramatically on the gravel path like she was on the cover of her own romance novel. Linda barked orders to the decorators who were stringing up even more fairy lights, despite the fact it was daylight and those lights would be as useful as a colander in a flood. They were just getting comfortable when I walked outside, waved politely and said, "Hey, just locking up the side gate. Wild animals have been getting in." Linda gave me a dismissive smile. "You're such a nature guy," she said like it was an insult. Angela asked if I could fetch them a few more chairs. I nodded, walked back to the gate, latched it, and then slowly, almost reverently, walked over to the barn doors. I peeked in. Everything was set. Guests were clinking glasses, popping champagne, someone was already yelling surprise, for no discernible reason. A toddler danced near a table of cupcakes. Linda stood in the center of it all, arms spread like she was presenting the Sistine Chapel. I smiled warmly, gave them a gentle nod and closed the doors. Click. I latched the external lock. It didn't happen right away. For a solid 30 seconds, it was business as usual, giggles, laughter, loud music echoing against the barn walls. But then someone must have gotten too close to the rafters. Maybe they bumped a beam. Maybe someone threw a balloon too high. Whatever it was, it started with one scream. Then another. Then it erupted like someone had hit unmute on a horror film. The kind of blood-curdling chaos you hear in haunted houses and discount zombie movies. From the outside, the barn started shaking. Hands slapped against the inside of the door. Screams reached opera levels. The Bluetooth speaker thumped wildly between verses of a Taylor Swift song and sudden silence, as someone must have knocked it to the ground. I heard glass shattering. A voice cried, "They're in my hair." Another yelled, "Open the doors, open the doors." I took a step back. Safety first. I waited 10 more seconds, then calmly unlatched the barn. It exploded open like a clown car of chaos. Women in flower crowns burst out, flapping at their hair and dresses, swatting invisible enemies. Angela sprinted through the field, veil flying behind her like a war flag. Linda tripped and face-planted in the grass, emerging with twigs in her hair and welts on her forehead. Someone tried to yell at me, but they were too busy dodging wasps to form sentences. I stood there, sipping my tea, like a local farmer watching a storm pass through. I hadn't raised my voice once. Hadn't touched a single guest. But every single person knew they'd made a mistake. And the wasps? They didn't even get paid for the performance. The best part? I had the whole thing on video. If you've never seen someone try to swat wasps while holding a 3-tiered mimosa tower, let me tell you, it's art. Pure, chaotic, tragicomic art. I wish I could have sold tickets. As Linda ran past me, shrieking something about an EpiPen she never actually carried, I took one leisurely step to the side so she wouldn't knock me over, then gently closed the barn door behind her. No need to let the rest of the wasps get ideas about colonizing my backyard. By now, guests were scattering in every direction. High heels dug ruts into my lawn as pastel-colored dresses flapped like panicked sails. One woman threw her sun hat at a cloud of wasps, as if she were challenging them to a duel. A grown man dove into the nearest bush and stayed there, peeking out with wide eyes as if he were in a war documentary. Angela, who had started the day in a flawless white sundress and sparkling tiara, now looked like she'd crawled through a hedge backwards while being pelted with gravel. Her mascara had melted into streaks that gave her the look of a very sad raccoon, and when she opened her mouth to yell at me, a wasp casually flew in and made her do a pirouette of panic across the gravel. Meanwhile, I leaned against my fence post, sipping a fresh cup of coffee. Black. No sugar. I like my beverages like I like my justice, strong and bitter. That's when someone finally tried to call the police. A guest, Some distant cousin, I think, fumbled for her phone while hopping on one foot and slapping her own shoulder like she was trying to keep beat with the screams. I heard her yell into the receiver, "There's a swarm of wild bees attacking us during a bridal shower," which, out of context, probably sounded like a code word for a bizarre cult gathering. I walked over, calm as sunrise, and said, "Just to clarify, they're wasps, not bees. Bees are pollinators. Wasps are opportunists." When the police showed up, 2 patrol cars, lights but no sirens, I could tell they expected something closer to a drunken brawl or maybe a rowdy barbecue. Instead, they pulled up to the most chaotic bouquet of fleeing bridesmaids and buzzing winged monsters they'd ever seen. Officer Mitchell stepped out, took one look around, and muttered, "What in the actual hell happened here?" I waved from my porch and said, "Morning, officer. Care for a cup of joe?" Mitchell and his partner, a younger officer named Patel, walked up cautiously as if they weren't sure whether to arrest me or thank me. Linda intercepted them first, flailing dramatically, demanding I be arrested for attempted murder. "He locked us in with insects. Lethal insects," she shrieked, while patting her arms as if wasps were hiding under her skin. Angela stood behind her, holding a shoe in one hand and a bouquet of wilted flowers in the other, her expression somewhere between shock, rage, and a faint hope this was all a nightmare she could still wake up from. Officer Mitchell looked at me. "Did you lock them in?" I nodded. "I closed the door for their safety. Wasps were already disturbed. Leaving the door open could have made things worse. Besides, they were trespassing." I handed him a printout of my security footage, Linda picking the lock earlier in the week, Angela giving a little ta-da wave as they entered, plus the animal control call log and pest control records Marvin had helped compile. I even included a hand-drawn diagram of the barn's wasp nest location with a friendly note that read, "Do not touch, angry bugs inside." Officer Patel examined the documents like he'd just received a syllabus for a high school course titled Entitlement 101, Advanced Karen Studies. Mitchell raised an eyebrow. "So, let me get this straight. You warned them the barn was unsafe. You called pest control. You documented everything. And they broke in anyway." I nodded. He looked at Linda. "Ma'am, did you force entry into this structure?" Linda went pale. It wasn't force. It was creatively persuasive access. That was all Mitchell needed to hear. He turned to his partner. "Get statements, and call animal control to verify the pest report." Then he turned to me. "You got a copy of that footage on a flash drive?" I handed him one. He smirked. "You ever thought about joining the force? Because this is the cleanest case of lawful pettiness I've ever seen." The wasps, meanwhile, had calmed down once the barn was quiet again. Animal control showed up and confirmed the hive's location, its status, and the fact that it had clearly been tampered with. The official conclusion? The noise and vibrations likely stirred the wasps, which reacted defensively. No one had been stung severely, just a few minor reactions, though Angela was now dramatically limping and swearing she'd been scarred for life, despite a noticeable lack of welts. Word spread fast. Within a few hours, the entire neighborhood had caught wind of the wasp barn incident. Photos began to circulate online, Angela mid-scream with a wasp in her hair, Linda trying to crawl under a table while holding a tray of egg tarts. Someone had recorded a video of the initial swarm, and another person had added dramatic music to it and posted it on TikTok. By the end of the day, #Barnageddon was trending. The HOA, of course, tried to intervene, because God forbid anything happen in this neighborhood without a strongly worded letter. Roger, still clinging to his flimsy title as HOA president, marched up to my door with a printed warning. "Hosting dangerous wildlife events on your property violates our community standards," he sniffed. I accepted the letter with a smile. "Roger, it wasn't an event. It was pest containment. You of all people should understand pests." Then I handed him a copy of the footage and the animal control report. He left without another word. By the end of the week, my inbox was flooded. Some guests demanded apologies. Others demanded money. Linda sent me a Venmo request for emotional trauma and dress replacement, $843. I declined it with a note that read, "Consider it a donation to the Wasp Preservation Society." Angela's fiancé, Brad, was strangely silent throughout the whole ordeal. I hadn't seen him at the shower or, more accurately, the panic stampede. But word got around that he'd seen the video and wasn't thrilled. Apparently, this wasn't the first time Angela had commandeered someone else's space for an event. She once turned a coworker's backyard into a pop-up photo shoot without asking. Brad finally called it off. The wedding was cancelled. No refunds on the custom napkins that said, "Angela and Brad forever, buzz off." And just when I thought things couldn't get more poetic, a local lifestyle blogger, one of those pseudo-journalists who lives off suburban drama and Pinterest disasters, reached out to do a feature. She titled it Bridal Swarm, When Rustic Dreams Meet Reality. The article went semi-viral. I didn't comment, of course. I let the photos speak for themselves, especially the one where Linda was running in flip-flops across my pasture with a wasp in her cleavage. Revenge is best served cold. But when served with a swarm, it earns standing ovations. When the HOA issued me an official violation notice for contributing to a hostile neighborhood environment through insect aggression, I laughed so hard I almost dropped my coffee mug. It was printed on heavy cream cardstock, probably the same printer they use for their passive-aggressive community newsletters, and bore the signature of none other than Roger himself, in ink that looked like it had been dabbed on by a trembling quill. I half expected it to be sealed with wax and a tiny HOA crest. The document accused me of creating a dangerous situation and failing to protect community members from harm during a social gathering. They even threw in the phrase, reckless endangerment, which I'm pretty sure they picked up from a courtroom TV drama and thought sounded threatening. I responded with my own letter. 1 page. Typed in Arial. Black and white. No nonsense. I attached time-stamped footage of the illegal entry, copies of the pest control records, the animal control report, and a signed statement from Officer Mitchell himself confirming that I was not responsible for the chaos. My closing line was simple. Your attempts at intimidation are noted. Further correspondence will be handled through legal counsel. Which was mostly bluster. I don't have a lawyer on retainer, just a cousin in paralegal school and a solid Wi-Fi connection. But they didn't need to know that. Then something unexpected happened. People started siding with me. Not just a few disgruntled neighbors whispering their approval during dog walks, but actual vocal support. I started getting nods from people who'd previously crossed the street to avoid making eye contact. One guy left a 6-pack of craft beer on my porch with a post-it note that said, "For the sting operation." A local teacher emailed me and said, "Thank you for standing up to them. This HOA has been terrorizing us for years." Apparently, my wasp-filled barn had struck a nerve. That's when the story reached a broader audience. A small-time local news affiliate picked it up after the lifestyle blogger's piece made waves on social media. I didn't speak on camera. They asked, I declined, but they did air footage from the public HOA meeting where Roger tried to blame me for the chaos. And let me tell you, watching him sweat in high definition as he fumbled over phrases like unmonitored wasp infrastructure and aggressive flying scenarios was a better payoff than I could have ever scripted. The news anchor ended the segment by saying, and in a sting operation unlike any other, one local homeowner may have just rewritten the rules of neighborhood justice. I stood and clapped in my living room. Angela, meanwhile, had gone into full meltdown mode. After Brad called off the wedding, she tried to spin it as a mutual decision and claimed she was rebranding her lifestyle to be more spiritually aligned. Her Instagram pivoted overnight from bridal content to posts about healing crystals, manifesting forgiveness, and very shaky yoga poses. One of her reels featured her trying to meditate while a distant wasp buzzed by, causing her to scream and throw a Himalayan salt lamp. It hit 45,000 views before she deleted it. Linda didn't fare much better. She attempted a public rant in the community Facebook group, accusing me of weaponizing nature, which quickly turned into a comment war she couldn't win. Neighbors posted memes of her ducking out of the barn, complete with captions like Buzzkill Barbie and Queen of the Swarm. Someone even photoshopped her face onto a beekeeper's suit with the tagline, "Don't poke the hive." To her credit, she didn't block anyone. She just silently changed her profile picture to a sunset and hasn't posted since. With public favor tipping in my direction and the HOA flailing for leverage, I decided to do the unthinkable: attend the next board meeting. Not as a guest, but as a candidate. That's right, I submitted my application to run for the HOA board. Officially. Legally. Pettily. The submission window had just opened, and with the scandal hanging over Roger and his toadies like a swarm of karma with wings, I had a solid chance. My platform was simple: respect for private property, transparent operations, and fewer useless fines about mailbox paint shades and lawn gnome placement. I didn't promise to be friendly. I promised to be fair, and to make HOA meetings less like witch trials and more like adult conversations. Word spread fast. The barn guy was running. I started getting messages from people offering to canvas, design signs, even bake cookies shaped like wasps. One particularly ambitious neighbor made little campaign buttons that said, "Sting Back 2025. The final straw for the old guard came when the local paper published an editorial titled, "Why We're Rooting for the Wasp Whisperer." It included quotes from neighbors praising me for standing up to HOA bullying and called the barn incident the moment suburban civility stung back. I didn't write the article. I didn't even know it was coming. But once it was out, the tide officially turned. Election night came faster than expected. The community center was packed. Normally, HOA elections were sparsely attended affairs where people begrudgingly shuffled in to rubber stamp Roger's cronies. Not this time. People came early. They brought folding chairs. Someone even brought popcorn. Roger stood at the podium, trying to deliver a dignified speech, but every third sentence was interrupted by quiet buzzing sounds from the crowd. Subtle. Savage. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it short. I stepped up, looked at the audience, and said, "I never planned to run." But then someone turned my barn into a bridal apocalypse, and the HOA backed them. That told me everything I needed to know. Applause erupted. I stepped down. Voting took all of 10 minutes. Counting took 20. When the results were announced, I'd won by a landslide. Roger lost his seat. 2 of his allies did too. I walked out of that community center, not just vindicated, but in control. The next morning, HOA headquarters, a glorified supply closet, had a new sign taped to the door. Under new management. My first official act? I passed a motion protecting homeowners from unauthorized events and declaring that any HOA board member who signs off on a trespassing incident without legal consent is immediately suspended. The motion passed unanimously. I named it the Angela Clause. Later that week, I held a press event in my backyard. Nothing big. Just a few reporters, some neighbors, and a lemonade stand run by a local kid who wanted to support the cause. I unveiled a handmade wooden sign for the barn. It read, "Sting Hall, a venue of unforgettable memories." We all laughed. Some people clapped. I toasted with lemonade and gave a small speech about boundaries, accountability, and the importance of respecting private space, even if it's just a dusty barn. Then I heard it, a faint buzz. Not the wasps. Those were long gone, relocated by Marvin to a more appropriate habitat. No, this buzz was figurative. It was the sound of a neighborhood realizing that justice doesn't always wear a badge. Sometimes, it wears flannel and drinks coffee while watching chaos from the porch. Angela and Linda moved out a few months later. No one threw them a goodbye party. In the weeks that followed my election to the HOA board, I expected things to settle down. Maybe a few final grumbles from Roger loyalists, a couple dramatic sighs from Linda's friends, and then peace at last. Instead, something even more satisfying happened. The story refused to die. It spread like spilled gasoline chasing a lit match, catching every little gossip ember in town. Somehow, it had become legend. Kids rode by on bikes pointing at my barn and yelling, "That's where it happened!" like it was the scene of a famous ghost sighting. Parents used me as a cautionary tale. Don't touch what's not yours, or the barn guy will get you. I wasn't just a homeowner anymore, I was folklore. Naturally, people started asking if the footage was going to be released. The viral clip of Linda diving under the buffet table already had hundreds of thousands of views, but the full security footage? That was the holy grail. My inbox was full of YouTubers, journalists, even one cable TV producer asking for exclusive rights to air the entire disaster. Someone offered me $5,000. Another person said I should sell it as an NFT. One guy from Texas offered to reenact the entire incident with actors, wasps, and stunt coordinators. I told him he might have better luck wrangling actual wasps than actors willing to play Angela and Linda. I didn't release the footage. Not because I felt bad, let's be clear, I didn't, but because I knew the silence was more powerful. The threat of footage was more terrifying than the footage itself. Angela, Linda, even Roger had no idea what I had and what I didn't. Every day the footage stayed private was another day they lived in paranoia. They tiptoed through the community, eyes darting like criminals in a courtroom, terrified I might drop the bomb at any moment. I became the HOA's own silent nuclear deterrent. That's when Angela tried to buy me off. It started with a suspiciously sweet email that read, "Hey, no hard feelings. I know things got a little wild. Let's move on? Would love to offer you a spa gift card or dinner on me, just as a peace offering." She added a smiley face. It was unnerving. I didn't respond. 3 days later, she tried again. This time, a handwritten note in my mailbox with a $250 Visa gift card taped to it and a message. "If you ever wanted to delete that footage, I bet we'd all sleep better." That's when I knew the guilt had set in like mold behind drywall. I took the card and donated it to a local beekeeper foundation. Then I sent her a copy of the receipt. Linda followed up shortly after. She didn't bother with charm. Her email was titled, "Legal Action." The body simply read, "You're on notice." No letterhead. No lawyer's name. No detail whatsoever. Just 4 words and a threat flimsier than a wet napkin. I forwarded it to my cousin in paralegal school, who wrote a fake cease and desist letter in response. It included a list of legal terms so hilariously obscure I had to Google half of them myself. Linda didn't reply. She just deactivated her Facebook. Meanwhile, on the HOA front, I got to work cleaning house. First, I abolished the mandatory lawn inspections, which had somehow turned into monthly opportunities for petty board members to fine people for having dandelions. Then I installed an online portal for homeowner feedback, which used to be just a locked suggestion box that Roger never opened. I even passed a motion allowing homeowners to use backyard sheds and barns without aesthetic review, as long as they didn't collapse or glow in the dark. The community responded like I just legalized pizza for breakfast. People started smiling again. Mowers ran on time. No one left passive-aggressive sticky notes on trash cans anymore. With my reputation restored and, frankly, elevated to mythical levels, I decided to retire the final piece of my plan. Sting Hall. The barn had been through enough. I gave it a fresh coat of paint, dark mahogany, and replaced the old rusted locks with a new keypad system. I even added motion-activated lights and a proper security camera. Then I installed a small custom-made plaque by the door that read, "Sting Hall. EST 1972. Reborn 2025. Venue of vengeance and closure." It made people laugh. Or at least nervously chuckle. And then came the cherry on top, the HOA Fall Festival. Now, originally, the Fall Festival was this boring affair, folding tables, lukewarm cider, and a guy who played the harmonica way too loud. But this year, as the new president, I had full control. And I turned it into a community celebration. We had food trucks, live music, pumpkin carving, and a barn tour. Yes, a barn tour. Not just any barn, mind you, at the barn. Sting Hall. Kids wore antennae headbands and fake wings, dubbed Wasp Scouts for the day. One neighbor printed limited edition "I Survived Sting Hall" shirts with cartoon wasps on the front. I gave a speech on the importance of community respect, standing up to bullies, and keeping pest control services on speed dial. And just for fun, I hosted a screening of Wasp-induced, the untold footage with names blurred and some cheesy music thrown over the screams. It was like a horror comedy film with just the right dose of schadenfreude. Everyone clapped. Some laughed so hard they cried. Angela didn't show. Neither did Linda. I heard they were living 3 towns over now, in a neighborhood with no HOA, no barn, and hopefully no wasp. Rumor has it Angela's engaged again, this time to someone who sells salt lamps and herbal detox teas. Linda supposedly started a lifestyle blog called Gracefully Karen, but it hasn't posted in months. As for me, I'm just a guy with a barn, a lawn, and a taste for poetic justice. I still go to HOA meetings, but now I run them like a referee with a sharp whistle and a shorter fuse for nonsense. Nobody questions my authority. Not since the incident. And no one, not even Roger, who now spends meetings quietly eating mints and staring at the floor, dares suggest using my property for community events. Every so often, someone new moves into the neighborhood and hears whispers about the barn. They ask cautiously, "Is it true what happened?" I just smile, sip my coffee and say, "Depends on who you ask." But I still keep the wasp suit, just in case. And that's how 2 Karen sisters learned the hard way that some barns aren't built for parties. They're built for patience, for justice, and occasionally for stings that leave a mark.